Welcome back to the SDG Warriors Podcast. I'm Simar Mohanty, the team lead and student coordinator at SDG Warriors, a team of passionate student changemakers and STEMinists who are dedicated to achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, leveraging the power of STEM education and 21st century skills. Brought to you by us SDG Warriors, this podcast features inspiring stories of EDUheroes and STEM experts from around the world, ideal for students, teachers, parents, and pretty much anybody interested in STEM education and social impact. This podcast aims to provide enriching learning experiences and drive positive change in local, global, and digital communities. And today, we'll be in conversation with an EDUhero who's a trailblazing EdTech specialist and an ISTE community leader, Miss Olga Kazarina. To give a short overview, Miss Olga is a digital learning coach and a Google for Education champion, recognized as an ISTE 22 Watch winner in 2024. She is passionate about bridging the digital divide and has dedicated her career to empowering educators and inspiring students like us. Through innovative tech integration and a focus on student centered learning, she is driving positive change in classrooms worldwide. We are absolutely thrilled to have you on our podcast, Miss Olga.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy and I'm so honored to be here, Simar. It's just such a big surprise for me when we are able to connect through different countries and continents. And right now we are connecting India and Chile. Isn't it amazing?
Yes, that's the power of technology, and I cannot wait to dive right into our conversation. But before we do that, to help our listeners audibly visualize the whole experience, can you tell us where are you located, what's the weather like outside, and what can you see from your window right now?
Thank you. That's a great question to start off. So I'm located in the very nice city on the coast in Chile. It's called Viña del Mar, which is literally translates into the vineyard by the sea. And the weather is like it's kind of cloudy, and I think it drizzles a little bit. So it's winter, and mostly here it doesn't get that sunny. But the good thing doesn't get so cold or chilly either, right? Like chilly in Chile. And I can see from the window, well, actually, here, like the landscape is a bit more like Italy. It's very green because we are located on the hill. And it's very important when you live close to the sea in Chile, or I guess in any coastal town, that you're like in the safe zone for tsunami. So that's why we decided to live more towards the mountain. And yeah, it's pretty green, and there are a lot of trees and some other houses.
Well, that sounds awesome, Miss Olga. Chilly, chilly. Well, it's 8 p.m. here in Bangalore, India, and it's that perfect time when the city starts to chill out. It's a lovely 22 degrees Celsius from what I can see from my laptop, and I'm accompanied by a light breeze and some chills. I can hear the traffic buzzing outside, and looking outside my window, I can see tons of cars, auto rickshaws, and people on bikes heading home from work. Well, so beginning with our conversation, let's go back in time, Miss Olga. What do you remember about the first time that you decided you wanted to teach?
Oh, that's one of my favorite questions because it brings me back to my childhood. So, originally, I come from Russia, right? And one of my direct relatives, that was my great grandma, she used to be also a primary teacher. And she taught during the times, during the Second World War and just after. And she was also the person who influenced me a lot when she raised me because my parents were very busy, they were working full time. So, I was spending a lot of time with my great grandma, and she was just such a role model of the person who was very patient, also dedicated to her work. She had to walk, I think, about 7 or 8 kilometers every day to get to the school. And then after school, she was tutoring students who struggled completely for free. Like she was very dedicated to make her students excel. And then afterwards, she also, for example, during summer vacation, she held some groups for for student support. So she was completely given to the school, and you could really see that she enjoyed it, even though she was a primary teacher, right? She was mostly teaching first and second grade. She didn't like the noise very much. So her classroom was always very structured, very organized. And with her example, I think that's the time where I got influence pretty much. So when I graduated from university, where I studied well Japanese and English, and it brought me all the way to Chile to work with international schools, I also had that passion of sharing the knowledge with others and helping them or guiding them throughout their learning journey. That's something that I guess inspired me, as well as I've been doing it for a good while, right? Since I was even in high school, I was already helping others, tutoring and teaching English and some other languages. And I guess the decision came kind of like organically or naturally, but it was heavily influenced by my great grandma.
Wow, Miss Olga, the way you described that memory, the passion to becoming a teacher definitely runs in the family, right from the inspiration of your great grandmother. That must have been a real turning point for you, and it's incredible to hear what first sparked your love for teaching. Everyone's got like this unique story, and it's always interesting to hear about how it shapes different EDUheroes' teaching styles. Well, speaking of which, let's dive into the communities you have been involved with. Miss Olga, you're an ISTE community leader. So, what do you want people to know about the different educational communities that you lead or you're involved with?
So I'll tell you about two communities, two very big international communities. One, as you already mentioned, community leaders by ISTE and ASCD, because of the merge, right? Now it's two organizations together, as well as Google Champion Community. So it all started back when I just got Google certified as Educator Level 1. And then I got involved with other people who were certified by Google. And at the same time, I got membership from one of my past jobs into ISTE, and I just sent my application to be ISTE community leader, and I got involved. Well, first of all, I was always passionate about sharing what I know, but also being supported by others, as well as working on some common projects. So both communities of well, Google champions and also ISTE community leaders. These are very like safe professional spaces where you can grow together. They are not just like experts, right, from whom or like big leaders. We all learn, we all grow, and we all support each other in our journey. So the power of those community was that basically sharing a safer space and having that support, having people all around the world on whom I can count and they can count on me, even though maybe we have never met in person, but we share so many things in common. For example, about ethical use of technology or the ways educational technology can be implemented in K-12 space. And then throughout those professional passions, we also connected in a more personal space, right? For example, when we decided to hold the conference that was called Global Impact, where you presented, Simar, with your teacher, Miss Kamal, right? I remember how inspiring it was. Like, we never met each other in a real life, but here we are for a common goal, a common purpose that really ignites our spark.
Absolutely. Communities are shaping the future of education. And when we talk about support, the collaboration, and the shared passion, when teachers come together, they don't necessarily need to be experts, just teachers who are making a real impact in their classrooms. Different communities and groups of students and teachers, these are essential for creating vibrant learning environments. And when there's a sense of belonging and exchange of ideas, these can cultivate a culture of curiosity in classrooms, something that we SDG Warriors stand for, to stay curious. Well, Miss Olga, I also imagine because you work with these communities, you must also align with certain educational visions like those of ISTE. And speaking in terms of a more global context, I wanted to ask, in what ways do you adapt ISTE's vision to suit different educational contexts around the world?
That's a very complex question, right? Because ISTE's vision is quite broad, right? It's to provide education in accessible and inclusive manner for each student to grow and to strive. So the way mostly I have been adapting here in, I would say, in Latin America, South America as well, is to adapt it to cultural context, because those standards, sometimes we do have that vision that they are global, right, or international, while sometimes they are focused more like on North America, right? So it's very important to make this cultural adaptation. Sometimes it means also adding some direct translations into Spanish or any other native language, as well as understanding how the educational system works. For example, the way we give feedback either to students or to colleagues, right? Or the way we understand inclusion, because each country has their own vision what inclusion is and what inclusion isn't, depending also on the resources that the country can provide. Um, so mostly I've been doing cultural appropriation, like culturally responsive teaching, right? So I try to tailor it to local maybe traditions, right, and also local views, and basically seeing like another human in front of me, right? Because I think when we're in the classroom and we work with teachers, sometimes they think, oh, like these are my students, right? But before they are our students, they're actually like humans, right? They also have their own views of things. So it's very important to see that humane part in each student and each teacher when we adapt vision, because vision can be something a bit global. So it's very nice to personalize and really get to know the needs of the students before actually implementing technology.
Absolutely, Miss Olga. Adapting ISTE's broad vision to different educational contexts involves tailoring its core standards to fit local needs and resources. And like you mentioned, every country has its own definition of inclusion. It's all about balancing ISTE's values with the unique challenges and opportunities of each educational environment to ensure that all students benefit from technology in education. Speaking of which, inclusivity is a key component of creating a supportive educational environment. So, Ms. Olga, how do you cultivate a sense of belonging for students from diverse backgrounds while ensuring everybody feels included and supported in their learning journey?
Oh, that's my favorite question, because not only it applies to students in the classroom, it also applies for to us in the work space as well. It applies to people like me who immigrated into some other people who live in a different countries. That's not country of their origin. So how we can cultivate? It's cultivating a culture, a shared purpose, where every student is celebrated and accepted, because sometimes I used to teach in the classroom where I would have, for example, 13 or 14 students, and every student would come from a different background, all the way from Vietnam to Palestine, Brazil, right, Spain. And you could really see how the only language they could actually communicate in was English, right? So, okay, we have a shared way to communicate, but then it's very important to cultivate that little community inside each classroom, setting rules, setting expectations, celebrating each difference, right? For example, through celebrating local holidays, because sometimes when you're aside from your community, whether it's a different country or just a different neighborhood, right, or just a different part of the country. Like, for example, in India, I know how many cultures and languages people speak, and every state is so different from one another, even the diet that people lead, right? So that's important for me as a teacher and educator, to make sure everyone feels included and supported, is to provide them the ways to express themselves and to accept those ways and to celebrate them in the classroom.
That's spot on, Miss Olga. When we say inclusive education, it isn't just about being accommodating to differences, it's about celebrating these differences and building a more supportive community. It's about creating a space where everybody feels like they belong, empowered to contribute and learn. And it's all about recognizing that our unique perspectives is what makes our classrooms a dynamic and important place for learning. While the concept of inclusive education is gaining traction slowly worldwide, its implementation definitely varies greatly. Like in some classrooms, it's like a daily practice, whereas in others, it's still an aspiration, which raises important questions about how we can bridge this gap. And this brings me to my next question. Miss Olga, the idea of inclusive education has grown and evolved. So, how does this concept differ internationally, and how does it build upon the traditional understanding of inclusion in schools?
Thank you for this question, Simar. I've been studying, just to give a bit of context, I've been studying at the university in UK, and last semester I just finished module on inclusion. I have been working here in Chile for the past, I think, 7 years, if not mistaken. And many schools have been also implementing inclusive teaching methods, and in general, like the big motto of the past years before pandemic, but especially after, has been inclusion, inclusive education, right? But the way it's seen, for example, in the UK, especially in academic research, and the way it's implemented sometimes may differ. What I'm trying to say with that, right? Sometimes I feel like in education there are very big concepts, right? Like a big umbrella where we should be able to meet those requirements and we should be able to make it work. And unfortunately, depending on the context, it might become also a buzzword, right? Like we are inclusive teachers, so we are creating inclusive environment. What does it even mean, right? So according to academic, again, meaning, like there are different types we can implement inclusion in schools, because sometimes we think it's inclusion, but in the reality it's a segregation or integration. For example, when we take a group of students, right, and we provide different materials for them, and we maybe pair them up or we put them in a separate group inside the classroom, maybe some people or some educators would think it's inclusion while it's actually integration. Or if we, for example, we take a group of students out so they are not exposed to mainstream school education, but they're in the same building but they're not in the same classroom, and it's closer to segregation than inclusion, even though we provide them with different materials, maybe differentiated materials or materials for them to scaffold their learning journey. So in that case, I would say that concept differs quite a lot internationally. I think really depends on how much the country can personalize the definition of it, because again there's academic definition what inclusion is, and then there's a practical application, a practical implementation. So each country is able to do it in their own way, and the way it builds upon the traditional understanding of inclusion. Well, in the end, what inclusion means in the school, that we would like all the students to be included equally in the learning journey, and we would like to provide them all the support that they need to develop their skills in an organic way, right? But how it looks like in the school, it might look very different, right? Depending on the number of the students, how also how many specialists we have, learning specialists, for example, if we are able to create those materials or create those groups of support, whether it's permanently or separately. But basically, there, the traditional understanding of inclusion would be having only mainstream schools, right? Not the segregated schools, not the schools that are only for students who struggle, let's say, whatever it means, whether it's neurodivergent students or students also who went through some difficulties in their families, right? So the traditional understanding would be having all the students under the same roof in the same classroom. But having said that, in that case, those students should be able also to develop their skills up to their level. And how it looks like in each classroom, again, it's quite different. According to, let's say, maybe teachers' expectations, like we cannot expect all the students to reach the level of excellency, right? And this is where also it gets quite inclusive, because we can see how much students can learn and how far they can go at this stage of their development. Doesn't mean that they are not going to reach maybe the higher level, but we also have to adjust teaching and learning for them.
Thank you so much, Miss Olga, for sharing with us and understanding the difference between inclusion and integration and segregation, because there's a big difference between those things. While the core principle of inclusivity in classrooms remains constant, its implementation, like you mentioned, varies globally according to different contexts. Some countries prioritize specialized support within regular classes, whereas the others might focus on full inclusion with minimal support. Well, if I reflect on my school years from what I've experienced so far, I've noticed like a shift from isolating students with special needs to creating more inclusive student projects where everybody contributes. And there's this one anecdote that I remember when we had to complete an investigatory project. There was a girl in my class with special needs, and nobody wanted to team up with her because everybody thought that their grades would go down. But then later, when the project was completed and our results had to come out, we noticed that she and the teammate that she was partnered with, they had the best project in the entire grade. That was because even though she had special needs, she excelled in data analysis, and the person who she was teamed up with was an excellent reader. So they utilized their superpowers, their skills, even though they have weaknesses. They utilized their superpowers, and then they were able to make their project successful. So definitely this definitely broadened my perspective, and I think all of my classmates' perspectives about acknowledging these strengths and supporting each other. And it can definitely cultivate a more equitable and enriching learning environment if we include everybody. Well, speaking of projects, because I brought this anecdote up, Miss Olga, we'd love to know what approaches do you take to tailor project based learning for international and inclusive classrooms?
Thank you for your question, Simar. And I would really like to expand on your previous story and the anecdote when you mentioned that students with special needs who got involved in the project based learning, because it really can tackle those needs and those learning differences for them to get involved. And again, not only for students with special needs, but for all the students actually, because sometimes again, me as a primary school, elementary school educator, sometimes those needs, right, they either don't get tackled on time, they don't get diagnosed, right? So sometimes you have different students in the classroom and all of them have different needs. So I really like of that the concept of all of us have different needs, and therefore all of us need a personalized ways of learning, and this is where technology comes into place. So my approach to tailor project based learning is actively and ethically using tech tools. For example, recently I have been working on educational robotics project. So I'm not teaching students about robotics. I use a robot, right? Like it doesn't really matter what company it is, but the robot with directional concepts. And it's another tool for students to learn about content and to learn about technology and through technology. I'll just give you a simple example. When students learn about surroundings, about living and non-living things, they get a programming mat where they can program their robot to go to a certain, let's say, insect, living, non-living thing. And this is how they learn about directional concept. They improve their spatial awareness by programming the robot. And they can either name the insect or living, non-living thing, give characteristics. And for the students who really struggle, let's say, with attention, I would not like to pathologize saying like these are the students with autistic spectrum, because I think it's very important to see again human before their condition, right? So students who struggle more, let's say, with attention or in general, maybe motivation and engagement, for them it becomes such a great tool. Just the same thing that you mentioned about the projects that the students worked in your classroom, your peers worked on. Sometimes other students wouldn't like to pair up with a particular student because they think their results are going to be lower. And in reality, on the contrary, when you provide so many ways for students to learn about the same content in the end, you can see how the engagement and motivational levels they go up. And that's, I think, the beauty of project-based learning, where you cannot where you not only can put different learning objectives in a very transcurricular, transversal way. Let's say we can tackle mathematics, right, language, social emotional learning, all in the same project, but also we can get everyone involved and we can help them to assume certain roles. So that's, I think, a very powerful way to create that international and inclusive classroom. Because again, when you have students from different countries or different even cities, right, or from different backgrounds, it doesn't have to be even, let's say, that international. So for them, it's very important to work on a common goal and common purpose. And this is how you can pair them up in those groups that align maybe to the skill level or maybe to their personal interest. And you can see how they actually reconnect with each other because they share the same passion.
Well, absolutely, Miss Olga. Project based learning is definitely effective, a very effective approach, especially when it's tailored to the individual student's needs. Like in my case, the teacher had stepped in when she saw that everybody was like, no, I don't want to partner with this girl. The teacher came in and she thought that, okay, if if people are not able to make the groups on their own, I'm going to assign teams. And that gave the student with special needs the motivation to actually raise a voice and also become an effective teammate. Well, it's inspiring to see how these projects can actually celebrate students' diverse cultures and backgrounds, like you mentioned. Speaking of which, Miss Olga, how do you integrate cultural relevance into student led projects?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question, Simran. So I'll just bring up maybe one example that could showcase how cultural relevance has been integrated in student-led projects. For example, I was a tech coach for a primary years program for some levels where we were leading readers and writers workshop. So those workshops, they are focused on developing either reading or writing skills for elementary students, but all the materials are normally from United States of America, right? Because they were developed there, because the research was held there, or maybe the publisher was from United States. And they're amazing materials with a great methodology, with a great progression. For us as teachers and also school leaders, it seemed like a very efficient way to teach reading and speaking and writing in a very authentic way. Let's say not just repeat sentences, right? Not just write something that was pre-written by a teacher, or not just read things that were written by some other like authors. So readers and writers workshop can really help students develop their creative writing since they are little, right? I find it amazing, right? It's a very organic way to develop those skills. But the thing with those materials was that they were not very culturally relevant. And the example here, for example, we were teaching students how to write paragraphs, right? Or how to write certain structures. And the example what was brought was peanut butter jelly sandwich. So in Chile, people don't really, I mean, there are some peanuts, I think, but people don't really eat peanut butter jelly sandwich. And being very like honest, I had my first peanut butter jelly sandwich when I was 19, when I went abroad to Middle East, and by coincidence I tried it there. So for students who are, let's say, 5, 6, 7 year old, it doesn't really make any sense. Like they are going to structure our writing in the way peanut butter jelly, like. So what people eat here, it's normally some kind of like baguette bread, right? It's called marraqueta, and they put some mashed avocado. So this is how we restructured the way the book was basically served to the students, so it would make sense to them. So that cultural relevance was very important. The same with celebrations, right? There are some celebrations in Chile, let's say in September. It's a very big, almost 1 week long celebration. And normally it's not included either in textbooks, or it's just not included in some more international programs. So we have to make sure students are exposed to that context, and they're also learning those cultural relevant elements and materials in their native language, because it's a part of their cultural heritage and cultural background.
Well, absolutely, Miss Olga. Integrating cultural elements into project based learning can help students to relate with the content. And when students relate to a content, they remember it as well. And this can prove to be transformative for students because they feel empowered when their backgrounds and perspectives are celebrated within their classrooms, when they see that their cultures are included in textbooks, in the material that they are learning. They become active learners, active participants, not just passive learners. And this approach definitely fosters a strong sense of belonging and can ignite a passion for learning as well. However, with the growing reliance of technology in education, we can see new challenges arise, especially with regards to student privacy. So, Miss Olga, as an advocate for ethical edtech use, how do you address concerns about student privacy and data security in digital classrooms?
Mhm. So I'll tell you a little bit about that, about ethical edtech use. Again, it's defined by each country and each school, because, for example, in the United States of America, there are very strict regulations on that. So each school, each district in each state has their own regulation that all the software programs, the, for example, educational apps or educational websites, they have to adjust to those rules. Just to mention a brief example of ChatGPT, why it has not passed those regulations, because it's not very clear if the data is stored, what is happening afterwards with data, right? Like that agreement has not been signed, as far as I can understand, between the schools and the company, because again, like their target audience is not educational community. Having said that, then it means it cannot be used by minors in the classroom. So about that ethical EdTech use, for example, in Chile, we're also very careful with students' data, and we hold either workshops or we share that information with other educators, like what are like good practices, right? What we should be sharing on the internet. Basically, is modeling digital citizenship, us as educators, or for example, school leaders, and the same for the students. Because student privacy and data security is a big concern nowadays and before. So those concerns, I think, one of the big, let's say, game changer for me was like we teach, or I teach digital citizenship, not from the fear, not from danger. There's something very dangerous. I teach it from the perspective what can be done and what should not be done. But basically, instead of don'ts, it's better to teach what can be done, because when we teach again through fear or through prohibition or through banning certain things, then we are left, or we are leaving our students with not a very clear picture. I understand what I cannot do, but what actually can I do? Like what is allowed? So this is the way those concerns can be shared, or can be also made very obvious, because when we talk openly about it, like let's say when we teach it in the elementary school, it's very important for students to reconnect with their own intuition. Because sometimes when we give them very strict rules, okay, don't share where you live, don't share your mom's credit card number, don't share your full name, okay. And then I think what actually happens when students, they're at home, they get to play games, they feel very comfortable, they may meet someone online and they establish some kind of like friendly conversation, and that data can leak, right? So it's very important for students to understand they're actually agents of their own data, right? They're the owners of the information, and they should be their own let's say controller in that way, when it can be shared, when it cannot. So I think that's the way also to teach critical thinking, right? And to teach those ways of digital citizenship, when it should be applied to make sure the student, when they want to share something, it is shared in a safe way, right? Because also I think for us educators and also like parents, it's very difficult to prevent or foresee all kind of situations that can be happening. And having said that, that's why in some schools where I worked, we would bring up that example. Being a digital citizenship, for example, in first grade, how do you explain how, like, who is a digital citizen? Like, what is digital citizenship, right? So there, expanding on that, we would bring up an example. It's the same as your, let's say, rules of behavior in the supermarket or on the street. You don't come just to a stranger and you don't, let's say, talk to them about what happens at home, right? And when your mom like leaves, or when your dad comes to pick you up, right? So that's the way how we can bridge that gap. It's basically also grounded in the theory of proximal zone of development, so we can make sure that the information we share either with students or parents or other members of educational community is relevant to them, and it's also explained in the language that they can actually understand. Because again, when we talk about those big concepts, and now, well, with artificial intelligence, it sounds so big and it does sound scary sometimes, right? So instead of understanding how I can use it or how I should not be using it, sometimes I just would like to ban it, right? I would like just to put it in under the rug. And this is what we wouldn't like to students to do, or parents to do as educators. We would like to show them how and to explain.
Well, completely on that, Miss Olga. If one only focuses on the don'ts, the first thing that comes in the students' minds is, okay, you said this is what we shouldn't do. So what can we do? What is an action that we can take? And definitely when you are when you're teaching the younger learners, the language teachers can definitely make a great impact and help these key concepts stick, especially with concepts like digital citizenship and with the advent of AI. So definitely, privacy and security are paramount for students and teachers as we navigate an increasingly digital world. And feeling safe and protected online is essential for building that trust in digital tools, which is definitely becoming indispensable for learning and communication these days. Well, as technology rapidly advances, especially with the advent of generative AI, like you mentioned, Miss Olga, we also see some other trends, and there also are many potential risks and concerns with regards to students. And keeping this in mind, Miss Olga, which emerging global trends in education technology do you think will shape future ISTE initiatives?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question again, Simar. I think you have mentioned generative AI. So also when I went to East Left 2024 to Denver, Colorado, that was a big emerging trend, right? AI in education or generative AI, right? How do we use it in the education? What can we do? Because it has been rapidly developing, right? It means that it has been always there, but now it's also involved in the education. So how as educators, school leaders, we can actually harness it. How can we use it to our advantage, making sure it's ethical use, how we can model the use to our students? Because that's something that really surprised me and astonished me in a certain way. Basically, the students that we are teaching right now, either is elementary, middle, or high school, sometimes what we are teaching, whether it's content or we are trying to help them develop certain skills, we cannot be 100% sure what kind of jobs we are preparing our students for, what kind of career, right? So I think one of the that EAST initiative will be focused on that, how we can foster that future-proof classroom, how we can make sure as educators, whether it's again artificial intelligence, generative AI, right? Any other emerging technologies, like for example metaverse. Recently I have been reading a very interesting research paper on metaverse and how metaverse has been used in educational context. And there is a lot of very useful guides from ISTE. For example, there is one again for me as elementary school educator, how I can actually teach artificial intelligence to my students. And there are different projects that I can involve my students in for them to understand what is behind artificial intelligence. Basically, it's about algorithm, right? About patterns, has many things in common with computational thinking. And again, it's not teaching about only a separate subject or separate topic. It's already integrated in many areas of our life that we are actually using like right now. So in that case, I think certainly it's going to be the same trend of artificial intelligence in education, and probably also social emotional learning. I think that's something that has been ongoing since the end of pandemic, like those differences in the classroom, again, how with the use of technology as educators, as parents, right, as school community, we can help our students thrive when there is a different social emotional context. That means basically the variety of needs has been getting bigger and bigger. So how those tech tools or either EdTech, different like programs and websites, they can be our friends in order to tackle it.
Well, future proof classrooms powered by the metaverse, artificial intelligence, and social emotional learning. It sounds like these will be providing a more stronger foundation for personalized learning, and this will be the core for future ISTE initiatives. I can see how these tools can adapt to individual learning styles and at a very fast pace, making education even more accessible and engaging for students. Well, Miss Olga, moving on to our next question. If you were to create a manifesto for student led edtech innovation, what core principles would you include?
Let me give it a good one. Manifesto for student-led edtech innovation. And what core principles? Hmm. I guess one of the core principles would be Student agency, I would like the students to be able for their manifesto to show up authentically, not only bring the excellence of the content or academic excellence, but also make sure their personalities and characters are included in that part, because I have been seeing many different student-led edtech innovation projects. As a matter of fact, now I'm participating in one very big course that led by UNESCO and Learning by Helping, that's focusing on SDGs, right, Sustainable Development Goals. So there are different educators and again school leaders, they're trying to foster those projects for their students and see different ways how to involve them. So one of the principles would be that to make sure students are involved with their ethnicity, with their cultural, historic background. Maybe the other one would be to make sure that what they are doing is very relevant to their own communities, that it's local before it's global, to make sure they can also focus on their, let's say, problems or issues, what they can see every day and not only think, because again, like when, for example, we are talking about SDGs, about sustainable development goals, when we talk about global warming, we think maybe somewhere icebergs are melting, right? We sometimes don't see it like in our own environment. So it's very important for students to be in charge of that first, to understand what the problems they can tackle in their own environment and to feel empowered. Well, if they can change it in their own community, right, they can also do it more globally. But first of all, to start local, I think that would be like two core principles.
Absolutely, Miss Olga. Creating a manifesto for student-led edtech innovation would be an exciting way to capture the essence of empowering students to take charge of their own learning. Like you mentioned, student agency would be a core principle, and definitely it would also emphasize more principles like creativity, accessibility, and ethical responsibility, which are definitely crucial for guiding the next generation of learners and innovators. Well, Miss Olga, as we look towards the future, it's important to consider how these principles can shape a more inclusive and innovative educational landscape. So, can you tell us more about metaverse that you mentioned earlier? We were really curious to know about that.
Yeah, sure. So, well, my actually one of the first times I worked with metaverse, I used to play computer games when I was a teenager and when I was younger, and I had no idea that the games I used to play in they were already in metaverse, right? They were in metaverse space. And then when I was teaching second grade, I was also participating in some project that involved Minecraft, and this is where I actually saw metaverse being put into practice in educational context, and it was a very innovative way. Again, why innovative, right? Because innovation sometimes becomes such a popular word, such a like a beautiful buzzword, right? Like we don't really sometimes put the real meaning behind that word. So why was that project innovative? What was so innovative? Because the same content that was ancient Greece, for example, was taught through metaverse. It means students were in charge of their own learning journey. They were able to not only observe, right, not only consume the content that the teacher would give them, but they were also be able to actively construct their knowledge by, for example, reproducing those ancient buildings from Greece, from ancient Greece, right? So this is where I saw metaverse coming into place in that educational context, basically project-based learning. And there was a lot of space for creativity, for self-expression. And at the same time, teachers were also actively involved in assessment and personalizing the experience. It was much easier for teachers to do that because metaverse in that case would provide so many different ways for students to get involved. Then the other time where I got involved, it was actually still live, a virtual version last year. So this is how we helped participants from around the world to get involved and to get connected to each other. Because the main beauty of ISTE conference, ISTE Live conference, is not only coming to presentations, it's actually those conversations that happen between educators. It's those nurturing connections then you keep after you finish the conference. So this was a way to do that virtually. So we created that space through metaverse where educators would meet each other, would engage in different activities. And then recently I read a guide on metaverse in education from Derby University, where I'm studying currently. And there were some ways to explain like what are the good ways of using metaverse and when the use is actually well justified. So I think I remember about two or three ways, like for example, when it's dangerous to conduct a classroom experiment. So metaverse can be one of the spaces. Or for example, in my case, when I studied chemistry in Russia, we didn't really have a lab. We didn't really have a lot of resources there. So in that case, metaverse could have been a great solution where we could still learn, but it would be a more like a low cost or more like a budget friendly solution, and it would be also much safer, right, without different dangerous like liquids and things like that. And then the other way, when it's actually impossible for students, for example, to go on a field trip, let's say to go maybe to on a safari in some African country, or to observe maybe, well, recently we were talking about Varanasi in India, how astonishing that culture is. And sometimes it's very costly, it's very expensive, right, to fly from one country to another. So this is where metaverse can actually provide us that educational context, and we can also involve our students in that. So these are were two or more or less the pillars when it's actually well justified, when the metaverse is used. And of course, these are like a recreational use, like of different games, right? That's another one.
Absolutely, Miss Olga. Metaverse is something that we really look forward to exploring more as a student club. And this sounds so interesting, using Metaverse to build the connections virtually for experiences that might be dangerous or too costly to afford. I absolutely love that because it can involve having simulations and provide a more immersive learning experience for students. Well, I'm so excited about that. Keeping the energy high, let's dive right into the next segment of our podcast. Miss Olga, are you ready for a rapid fire round?
Yes, I am.
All right, first question. Miss Olga, if you could use only one Google tool for the rest of your life, which one would it be?
Oh, that would be Gemini. I absolutely love it. I use it for so many purposes. Let's say to plan my university assignments, or even to play a getaway trip, or for example, to adjust my diet for certain nutrients. And for sure, I would use it for the rest of my life because it's so universal.
Absolutely. It's just like having a buddy who's always there to help you and be your soundboard. Well,
Assistant. Exactly.
Miss
Yeah.
Olga, if you could partner with a fictional character from the books or movies to co teach a lesson, who would it be and what subject would you tackle together?
Oh, that's a good one. I don't know, but I keep on thinking about Harry Potter. It's like one of my most favorite books. So maybe I would maybe then I would partner with, well, with the main character, with Harry, and certainly I would try to co-teach a project-based lesson on being courageous, because I think he's the character who actually is very courageous. He has a lot of very different strong sides, right? And I guess what subject? Well, something magic related, right? About the magic wand. I think it's just something so much fun. But basically, how to endure different difficulties in life, because I feel like Harry Potter, even though we see him as a hero, he has different sides, different emotions. So maybe how to be hopeful in a hopeless place. That's a very interesting lesson to be taught.
Absolutely. I would honestly love to be in that classroom and experience and immerse myself in that entire experience of being in the wizarding world and having you and Harry Potter as my teachers. That would be amazing.
Yes,
Well,
Simar, you would get a chocolate frog for sure.
yes, and I would make a big collection out of all of them and share it with all my friends. Ooh. Well, Miss Olga, if you could make one immediate change to the education system, what would it be?
Oh, just one. It's hard to say, huh? Well, that one would be to have a more, I guess, inclusive classroom. I mean, it sounds pretty traditional, right? But I would really like, if I had a magic wand as like Harry Potter, I would then put a spell on each classroom so every student would get enough tools, resources, and ways from their educators to learn and to have that faith in themselves. So no matter the difficulties, they are going to persevere and they're going to make it. So I guess that that inclusive magic wand with some hint of hope. Hmm.
Inclusivity for the win. Well, that was awesome, Miss Olga. Thank you so much for your time. As we come to the end of this episode, let's move towards some deeper inspiration now and wrap up all our learnings and takeaways from this episode in our last segment, the Inspire segment. Well, Miss Olga, who or what has been your biggest inspiration in life and why?
Well, one of my biggest inspiration in my life has been, I think, my great grandma, again, who persevered in the times of Second World War and still kept such a bubbly and lovely personality. And actually, well, my name, I was named after her. So her name was also Olga. And when I think about her, she had such a difficult but also such a happy life, as she was elementary school educator and then she became widow twice, and at the same time she kept again that like positive outlook on her life, and she passed away when she was 93. So I think I tend to think about her, how many different lives she lived and how many different skills she developed, again being a teacher. At the same time she was also a farmer, so she had a lot of rabbits, about like 100 rabbits, and she used to sew different things out of their fur. So just to have this very, let's say, multi-potential personality has been the biggest inspiration to me in my life.
Well, a shout out to Nana Olga because she definitely exemplified resilience and having a positive outlook on life despite all the challenges. So she's definitely a edu hero for our generation today. And your inspiration definitely reminds us about how important it is, that how important our loved ones are in guiding us towards our dreams and becoming the best versions of ourselves. Well, Miss Olga, what words of inspiration were given to you that you would like to pass along to others?
Hmm. I guess one of the most, like let's say, the words that I mostly remember was that all the difficulties are temporary, right? It's like the clouds in the sky. Sometimes it's raining, sometimes it's sunny. So it's very important to understand that no matter what, these things are going to pass, whether they are good or bad. Everything is temporarily, right? And it can have a positive or negative connotation. And then we should really understand how short life is. I mean, I know it sounds pretty, let's say, boring, right? Like live your best life right now, but then some things happen in life, and you understand that actually we are not eternal, right? Beings, that there is end to everything, and how important it is to be mindful of the present moment and to be fully here right now.
Absolutely. Being in the moment and being mindful about your present and noticing that not all challenges are permanent. Everything is temporary, including us. So, this too shall pass. I love that advice, Miss Olga. And for our last question, Miss Olga, can you give us all a call to action? What can we, children and young people, do to make the world a better place?
Hmm. Well, I think for children and young people, what we can all do to make the world a better place is, first of all, to be kind to others, but also to ourselves. I think that kindness and empathy starts like charity at home. So we should be treating not only others well and respectfully, but we should start being kind to ourselves, and then follow our passion, figure it out what our passion is, and follow it, and yeah, be able to change our mind, because I truly believe if we are very happy both in school or at work or at home, we are not going to act in a malicious and a bad way when we have our things figured out and balanced. So that would be the two of them, being kind and being empathetic, to try and foster that empathy within us first, and make sure we stay true to ourselves. That for me, it means to follow our dreams, to follow our passion, but first of all, figuring out what actually my passion is and be able to be cognitively flexible, be able to make a change when some things don't work out.
Absolutely. In a world where we can be anything, choose to be kind. That's such a powerful way to end our discussion today, Miss Olga. Uh, Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. It's been a lovely conversation and absolutely inspiring listening to your journey and all your insights into building communities around global education and cultivating that sense of inclusivity and a spirit of innovation in our classrooms using technology. So thank you so much, Miss Olga.
Thank you so much, Sima, for having me. I'm also so inspired and so honored by SDG Warriors and all the amazing work that you have been doing. You're such an example to follow for many children and young people.
Thank you so much, Miss Olga. That means the world to us. And to all our listeners, we hope this episode has served as a catalyst for inspiring innovative educational practices and fostering a deeper understanding for inclusivity and empowering you to create learning environments that transcend geographical boundaries. It's a call to action that we should all contribute to building global communities of learners where diversity is celebrated and where every student's potential is realized and empowered. So, to deepen your knowledge of everything STEM, sustainability, and education, subscribe to the SDG Warriors podcast for in depth discussions and meaningful conversations with leading experts like Miss Olga, who are shaping a better world, one action at a time. If you love this episode, help others find it by leaving a review and sharing it with your friends, teachers, and family. Stay curious and be the change. Until next time, it's bye from the SDG Warriors.